Hello. Welcome to Pick Up the Vince, Harvest's only official podcast. Is that how he says it? I'm not Mike.
You're not
Pick
Mike.
Up the Mike.
And Pick Up the Vince isn't our only official podcast.
This is Pick Up the Vince. Where is Mike right now?
He's in India, West Bengal, India.
Mike is in India. I'm here, and you're listening to Pick Up the Vince this time.
Who is Vince?
I am the current campus pastor of the Natrona Heights campus.
Are you planning on leaving or getting fired?
Well, I mean current because there was more than me. We've had that's why
the
I say
newest,
current. The newest. I plan to stay
pastor.
a long time. I'm not.
So you're down in Natrona Heights at our Natrona
I live there,
Heights
I work
campus.
there. It's my home. It's kind of cool. I can walk to church. I walk to get my hair cut. I can walk to buy groceries. It's like I live in 1940.
Natrona Heights still has it's still one of those old steel mill towns where
it still has a pulse. Yeah.
Everything's.
It's a slight pulse, but it's a pulse that I like.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, I think most people know, Natrona Heights is 20 minutes down 28 south.
Yep.
Closer to the city than Katanning, but still kind of in the hinterlands. And it's our newest campus of the four. So
yep.
Was previously our Freeport campus, and sometime in 2019, I think end of 2019.
It was there in 2019 because I came as a guest preacher then, and I preached at the Freeport campus at night. That's back when it was
okay. So then
live
2020
preaching at night. I did a sermon there before I was even a Harvest guy. I was just a Harvest fan at that point.
Well, welcome. So now you are a Harvest guy,
I'm a Harvest guy,
and so this is going to be another one in our broken up series of Meet Your Pastors. So we've got an opportunity to meet Dave First and Michael Harvey. Dave First isn't actually a pastor here anymore.
That was expired.
He's just an elder now.
You can still meet him. But.
Yeah, we have met him. And so Vince is another one of our campus pastors. So we have a few more to get through. But hey, today's Vince.
Yes,
so where to begin? Let's start with, where did Vince come from? Are you a Western PA guy originally?
Yep, I'm a Western PA guy. Spent most of my young childhood in Lower Pearl, which is not far from where I'm at, in Natrona Heights. Moved all around the Pittsburgh area. My dad was a cop.
I didn't know that. I think I did know that, but I forgot.
Move a lot, but we moved into different parts. We left a little bit, not that far. We went to Somerset County in a little town called Rockwood, then moved back here. We lived close to Harmerville, if you know that area. That's where my parents still are. Now I'm in Natrona Heights, so
now
haven't moved far.
Did you go to a public high school? Were you guys homeschooled?
Yeah, so I was homeschooled, and the reason for that is, so I come from a family of 10 kids. I'm the second oldest of 10. We all went to a Christian school. Well, there weren't that many of us then. I was in the second grade, and I stutter when I talk. From the second I started talking.
You stutter?
I stutter. You might have picked one of the two up already, but I stutter when I talk. I did then. I still do now. And the teacher in the second grade at this school, that I won't say, wasn't too skilled at handling a stuttering child. We'll say it like that. Made my mother mad. She's a good mom, protective of her kids being not treated well. And so she said, I'm going to homeschool. She knew nothing at the time about how to do it. Yeah. And she's like, I'm going to do it. I know I can do better than you.
Right.
Was her idea.
She knew you weren't dumb, and she had the motherly patience and grace that this teacher should have had and didn't.
Yes. And so she took just me out. I was the solo homeschooled kid for 1 year. And then she's like, I can do this. This is.
So you were like the guinnie pig, the family guinea pig.
The stuttering guinea pig. That was me. And that was a cool year. It was just me and my mom learning. I mean, I was in the, I don't think I finished the second grade in that school. I don't but it was second or third grade was the first year there. So yeah, it was awesome. And then at that point, there were two other siblings of mine who were in school. She pulled them out. I have an older sister who's 6 years older than I am, so she was quite a bit older, and she finished through homeschool. Then all the rest, all 10. Actually, not even all of them are out yet. There's still some in the pipeline.
So, well, let's go. So that's even crazy to think. So let's think about what it's like to have 10 kids. So you're the second oldest.
Exciting.
How old are you? 30.
I will be 30 in February. Soon.
30 in February. So what's the span of your siblings? So your older sister's 36.
Yep.
What's your youngest sibling?
Oh man, I'm gonna get this wrong.
Roundabout. They'll forgive you.
He's an early teenager. He's not driving yet, so probably close though, like 14, 15, around there.
That's men for you folks.
Yeah,
we can't keep track of our own age, let alone everybody else's.
Love you, bro.
So that's crazy. So your mom's been at it for quite a while then, like second grade Vince to now.
She's a homeschool expert. She's
nice.
She's got all the tips. She's got it down.
She's got administrative talent, I'm sure, at this point.
If she didn't when she started,
she does
got
now.
Truckloads now.
Yeah, it's quite the resume.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so that second grade switch to homeschool. Are you in Harmerville at this point, or are you guys still bouncing around?
That would have been when we lived in Lower Burrell, and we bounced all around there. And then, so like a fast forward to when we came back from Somerset, because that was all me growing up. My dad isn't a cop anymore. He owns his own business. He makes like commercial canvas things, like awnings, boat cover. I guess not all commercial. It's just that kind of stuff. He sews in a very manly way, big heavy sewing machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
industrial sewing.
Industrial manly sewing, yes.
As if you have to qualify.
The manliest seamstress you've ever seen. It's my dad.
Okay. Sorry, Dad. Seamster.
Seamster. Yeah.
That's like a teamster, but a seamster.
Yeah. So that's when we moved back, right around high school time for me. I was homeschooled. I started working for my neighbor who is a home improvement contractor. And so and then I got an opportunity to do ministry work. So those were two things that would kind of stick with my personality the whole way through, was home improvement, handyman work, and ministry work.
And God's work.
Yeah.
Well, so before we get there, so I'm picking up on context cues or clues from trying to pay attention. Yeah. You said Christian school. Yep. So I take it your family was you from a Christian family, professing Christians.
Yes, my mom had one of those like radical conversion stories. Like she had a dream and Jesus said, I probably won't quote. Well, so she had a dream. She heard a voice that she took to be God saying, "You're mine now."
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yep, you're
gotcha.
mine now. Yep. Yes, something like that.
That's awesome.
And she woke up and her life, you know how like we all sanctify, but like some people have like a fast forward sanctification. She had one of those fast forward sanctifications. She lived a certain lifestyle, and that was like, gosh, she had no desire for former ways like overnight.
Oh, that's
crazy. Which is that's like one of those cool rare ones that are like, a lot of us are like, I have to like strangle the desires out of me, and some people get them just removed. And so she had one of those, and so she was very very Christian, very just telling her kids, telling her friends, telling her husband, telling everybody. And so I grew up in that environment. So
did that happen in your lifetime, or is that a
I was 2.
Okay.
Around 2, yeah.
Okay, so she was already married, a mom, and man, what a blessing to the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we all quickly followed suit. My dad was saved shortly after that. And so it was a passionate Christian lifestyle, but like you were a new Christian. There's a lot of I love God, but when someone asks you, what does that mean? You're like, I don't know, but I love it. And so like, so there was a lot, we went to a lot of different churches. Spent a lot of time in like very charismatic churches. Went to some small country style churches. Got a sample, like, and I would learn things and not even know I'm learning like even contradictory theology and
Right, figuring out the details.
yeah, exactly.
You
You'll
know,
figure that out later.
It's funny, what came to my mind is the Barney song. Like, I love you, you love
Yeah.
me. We're
Yes.
one big happy family. But now I need to figure out
Yeah, how?
what
Why me?
what does this book that I'm supposed to know say about
Yeah,
things.
exactly. Yes, and so, yeah, my mom and my dad were on that journey. I would follow behind, 10 or 15 years after, once I started to care with my mind, and so that was, yeah. So
So are you one of the what I consider blessed children to like not really have some demarcated regeneration moment? You just
yeah,
it happened. I'm not exactly sure when it
Yes, I'm
happened.
not
I've
exactly
always
sure
been a
when.
Christian.
I look at my baptism. So like I look at, there was my baptism in the church I was going to, the kids pastor, Pastor Keith, sat and talked to him, and like I understood how to explain that Jesus had changed me. And I don't even know how old I was then.
In diapers.
No, not quite that young. I wore diapers a long time. No,
We won't go there.
No,
We won't go there.
I was, yeah, probably 7 or 8. I don't know, so something like that. And he baptized me. The church we went to was one of those ones that had like the big, like when you were in the baptism tank, you were probably like 15 or 20 feet above the stage, and it was like a big like octagon kind of shaped auditorium. So I was up there, nervous as anything, and just like and I actually recall what I said. I said, well, I guess I don't recall exactly, but I said something like, I know Jesus changed my life, and I want him to continue to change me and use me, is what I said.
What
And,
an
yeah.
8-year-old prayer
Yeah,
that is.
Yeah. I had some help.
Everybody out
from
there,
my
take
mom
notes.
And my dad, but
This is what you want your children to
yeah,
say.
yeah, and he has, and so so yeah, from there, like I was saved then. But sometimes I say I call myself a slow learner, because it wouldn't be until like my early teenage years that like I really understood even what that meant. It was even, I even like would have been tempted to say, I might even have said then, that I didn't even know that I was saved before that point. But I do think I was. But it was like there was such a knowledge that got poured into my head that it was almost like I felt like I got saved twice.
When you were a teenager.
Yeah. That second experience was like something unlocked about like understanding sin in my life and how Jesus paid for it. It hit me anew, and so it was like, yeah, it was almost like I got saved twice.
Yeah, and I don't think that's uncommon, right? It's like
No, I don't.
right around that time when your frontal cortex is developing enough to really appreciate deeper concepts.
Yeah,
so.
it was after that I was sure from that point on that Jesus was real. He died for me. God raised him from the dead, and I'm one of his people. And so it was such a strong change that I was like, maybe I wasn't even saved before.
Yeah.
And now that I look back again, I'm like, I think I was. I think like if my son would have felt and acted and said what I said then, I would say he's saved. And so I think I was saved, but that's why I said I was just a slow learner. It took me a couple years to that's what I got.
There's also some amount of discounting you have to do just for the fact that it's an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
Or a 9-year-old.
Yeah, there's only so much you understand.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're a teenager. So you were just talking about this passion that's starting to develop and carries through to today. Handyman work, home stuff, and then ministry. So like even as a high school age teenager, you're homeschooled, but you're high school age teenager, you have a passion for wanting to do ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how that started. My family was always at church. We were doing church stuff. That actually, I do know how it started. My parents were always serving the church. There was a period of time when I was young, we were there 7 days a week, and no one was being paid.
It was like second home.
It
like,
was.
This is where we hang out when we're not at the dinner table.
No one was being paid to be there. My dad did eventually work at the church. Some as like a facilities guy, but most of the time we were just there because we wanted to do ministry. And so that was undoubtedly where I got that desire to do it. I didn't know that I wanted to do it full time, I guess, yet.
Still don't.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
So you're like serving, you're a teenager, you're serving on teams at the church, you're in the youth group.
The church. My family ran a ministry where we'd make food and take it down and feed like the homeless and share the gospel and just do all kind of church things at that point. And and then it was around that time that I was in high school. I was homeschooled. Any homeschool high school guys know that it's not a typical high school experience. So I worked all day doing home improvement work. I do my school at night. And then I got the opportunity, still in high school, to travel periodically with a Christian evangelist. He was a former basketball player, and he has a whole story. But he would travel and do evangelistic events at schools and youth groups and churches and street ball tournaments. And
how did you meet this guy?
He was the youth pastor at my church for a short time.
Okay.
He was there for a short time. He was much more gifted as an evangelist than a youth pastor.
Yeah. But you develop a relationship.
We became really close. Yeah.
And then he says, I'm going back on the road.
Yeah, he was always doing this stuff on the road, like on the side as a youth pastor, because those kind of things kind of fit. And so I got to go with him once when he was the youth pastor. We were actually, this is the story where we were going from Monroeville out to Harrisburg, and we were in a church van, and some youth group kids they had like a Jeep Cherokee or something. We were racing. He was driving the church van full of youth kids, racing down the turnpike, and and it was.
Your kids are safe at youth group, people.
Yeah, this is not a Harvest youth event. It's not a Crave thing. We were racing down the highway, and it got to the point where 18-wheeler trucks saw what was happening, and they lined up to block him from racing down the highway. He was going very fast, and he went around them, like around on the median, around at a very high speed in a church van full of kids.
Kids loved it.
We loved it.
Kids loved it. This is how you. This is how you endear teenagers.
My
to
parents
youth
were
group.
the only ones who said you can go on more trips with this guy.
So that was trip number one.
That was trip number one.
Oh man,
that was trip number one with all of us.
Do you think that's what got him fired as the youth pastor?
That and things like it. Yeah.
So he goes back to being an evangelist.
He goes back to being an evangelist.
And your parents say, "Yeah, what the heck?"
They say you can definitely go along. I played a lot of basketball back then, so it was all the things I liked: basketball, Bible, ministry, and so we would travel all over the place. At first, I was just like his sound guy, and would set up events, and it was. I mean,
you were his gopher.
Awesome. Yeah, it was awesome. It was like the coolest thing I could have done at that age. And
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. As a relatively new parent, you're a new parent yourself. Trying to imagine my 17-year-old.
I'm so glad they let me.
And like, hey, I just want to hop in this van with this guy.
I was probably younger then. I was probably like 14.
Dang.
Yeah.
It was 20 years ago, people. We're not even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
This is a different time.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they did. I mean, it was a big part of. So that's when I loved ministry, and it, at least in my mind, and also some of the the ministry circles we ran in. There's a lot of passion for ministry and doing ministry work. But in me, at least, there is very little knowledge of God, very little theology, very little doctrine.
But you made up for it with exuberance.
Passion. Yeah, there were times that we would like my friend, he was such an interesting guy. He would like stop the car. We would go to these places. One time I remember we were in Long Island, New York, and we would stop where you could kind of like see the water. And he's like, hey, we're going to go to all the cars that are parked here and we're going to knock on the windows and ask to pray for everybody. And he's like, all right, go. And we just like at like 15, like, I don't want to do this. And I knock on people and I would stutter like crazy. Like, can I pray for you? And they'd be like, what? I don't have any money. And I'd be like, no, I want to pray for you. And so like things like that was the kind of stuff that we would do.
That's wild.
Yeah. So like, yeah, that kind of passion for like, we need people to know Jesus, bring them to Jesus.
So this, like, if you've been a Christian for a little bit, you always hear about like the spiritual gifts, right? I forget what book, there's a list of them in, and you probably know, I'm drawing a blank. But so this guy's definitely gifted in evangelism. Did you feel naturally gifted in evangelism?
No.
But this kind of like,
yeah,
you had to be if you were hanging out with this guy.
Yes, yeah, you had to be if you were hanging out.
Hey,
with
uncomfortable?
This guy.
Well, we're gonna get you comfortable. Go knock on 15 car windows.
Yep. Yeah, and like that wasn't even what we were there to do. That was just like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna go ask people to pray, and and so there was a lot of that. But in my mind, it was like I didn't like I probably couldn't even tell you like the gospel, like what the gospel was in a clear way. I would just tell you like Jesus loves you and he has a plan for your life, and that might have been the furthest I would go, but I couldn't explain like atonement and Jesus taking our place. Like I would have no depth in that, but I wanted you to know who Jesus was, and that's what we all were. And I don't want to speak for anybody else. I don't think everybody knew as little as I did at the time, but I'd like,
the whole team was.
I was very passionate, didn't know a whole lot, and that was fine with everybody.
Yeah,
I was on the team, and it was cool.
Energy can make up for a lot of shortcomings.
Yeah,
that's a good thing to know out there, people. Passion and energy.
If you mean it, people will believe it sometimes.
Yeah.
And then so that ended abruptly.
How long did that go? So you said like 14
couple years. Yeah,
14 through your driving.
Yeah, like to like 17. Somewhere there, and then that ended abruptly. I don't even want to get into it. It doesn't matter at this point. But to me, it was like something got ripped out of me. Like this thing I was doing.
Nothing creepy happened.
Nothing creepy happened.
Nothing creepy happened.
Nothing creepy happened. It was just it was like most things are, a miscommunication that I wouldn't even say it's that. It was just it just happened. Actually, here's what it is. God wanted me to not do that. Like when I look back on it, that's what it was. God wanted me to stop doing that. And
Providence.
And I didn't like it.
But it was a big loss for you.
It was, because like I was already planning, like, this is what I'm going to do.
I'm going to be the next.
I'm going to follow in his footsteps. Like he used to do, like, he had like a basketball routine where he'd spin a basketball on his finger, and I could do all that stuff. I was like training to do all that stuff.
I don't want to like pigeonhole you or anything physically, but you just seem like a fullback, not a basketball player.
I never.
I don't know
really
if you were
played.
always this shape. If you have never
I was
met
always
Vince,
kind of chunky guy. Yeah.
Well, you're not chunky now.
I was like a thick guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was
If you've never met Vince and can't tell
broad.
on camera, he looks like Brian Urlacher from the Chicago Bears.
Yeah. That's very nice. Yeah, I've been described as broad before. And
that's accurate. So anyway, you were a baller, basketball.
Yep, played basketball. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. It left. It wasn't a part of my life anymore. And I hated it. Felt like God betrayed me, maybe, like, what's happening? I did the right thing and all this. Yeah. And so, but it was during that time I met someone who become one of my best friends. And and it would become the pastor of the church I would serve with, Chris, who you know.
Great guy.
He was doing a Bible study at a Panera Bread in Monroeville. He was going through Romans. This was, I believe this was his second time going through it, and it took him 8 years every week to go through Romans. And he would go verse by verse by verse. That dude knows Romans. If you have a Romans question, that's your guy.
Call Pastor Chris.
Call Pastor Chris. And so I jumped in maybe like the last 2 or 3 years. I jumped in, and then so this guy who had passion but no knowledge met the perfect guy who could take 8 years in Romans, and we became friends. I was like, oh, there's things to know. And I met, and then I got to read other books and hear other pastors. And
how did you walk into Panera one day to get a bagel and be like, oh, look, a Bible study?
My sister had a friend who would go to the Bible study. She invited my sister invited me.
Word of mouth.
Yep. Word of mouth.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there was
Providence.
Yeah, exactly. The Providence button. Yeah, there was probably like 40 people in and out who had been a part or would be a part of this over its life. And so that's when I really started to love the Word of God. That was like another. So I loved God Himself, and that was expressed in ministry. I knew nothing, but I loved Him. Then I loved His Word, and that was expressed in studying hardcore. Like, I was still probably in high school, the last year or two, I was like all the theology I could get. That was most of my schooling, was just self-learning theology, reading Calvin and Luther and Puritans and listening to sermons and lectures and debates, and like that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah, you're one of those guys, just to go off track a little bit, you're one of those guys that always makes me feel really behind. Having not gotten saved till later in life, and being just literally like a decade behind. When you talk to Vince, if you get a chance, say hi to him, or if you have never been to the Natrona Heights campus, go down there for service on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, 1207 Pacific Avenue. Nice. Vince is one of those guys who just comes off as 15 years older than he is because he knows so much.
I've always been that way. Even when I was a little kid, they thought I was like a really slow 5-year-old, and I was like 2 because I was just big.
You're big.
I was just big. So yeah, they've always thought I was older than I am. But.
Yeah, well, that work you put in, like that providential step that you just talked about, where God pulled you out of the traveling ministry, put you in the care of Chris, Pastor Chris, to spark your passion for the knowledge of God.
Yeah.
It pays dividends now.
Yeah. And so that's what it was all about then. Interestingly enough, my other friend Seth would come back into my life.
Oh, nice.
He came back, asked me to continue traveling with him. I was older. I was an adult at this point. And I knew stuff, and I was like, yeah, let's go do ministry. And it actually gave me a way to like bring some of the Reformed theology that I would been
orthodoxy.
Yeah, some of the Orthodox Reformed theology into places it might not normally go, into churches that wouldn't normally have it, and they just put me on a stage. It was actually with Seth. It was the first time I was ever put on a stage. We're in Albany, New York. This is before I met Chris. I'm kind of hopping around. But before I even met Chris, I was in Albany, New York. Seth was supposed to speak, and he said, the guest speaker tonight doesn't know he's the guest speaker, and pulled like 16-year-old me up.
He Charles Spurgeoned you.
Yep, pulled me up on stage and was like, he's going to speak for you today. And I was just like scared to death. That was the first time I ever spoke. And actually, this is a weird story, but it's true. In that crowd that night, there was a man from Africa who came up to me, and I'm not going to do my Africa voice on the...
He has a very great African voice. He's being sensitive.
I'm not going to do it. But he came up to me, and he's like, young man, and he said in a very cool...
just do it.
Deep Africa voice.
Everybody's friendly here. We know. We'll get to your Africa escapades.
He says, young man, the Lord wants you to be a pastor. That's what he said, right to me. That's
Great African voice.
Yeah, that's what he said. He took me to the pastor of that church. He told the pastor, he's like, before God and before you, I'm telling you, the Lord wants this young man to be a pastor. That's what he said right there. And I was like, cool. And
Vince is the next Charles Spurgeon.
maybe. We'll see. I can't grow a beard very well, so I'm out.
Just for reference, and I don't know how accurate it is, it's the story that I heard somewhere. I can't even remember where. Charles Spurgeon, the great preacher,
The Prince of Preachers.
the Prince of Preachers, he was reluctant to be a preacher, got invited
Yeah,
to
there's
some
something
big
like
thing
that.
to see the new preacher. Like his friend was taking him someplace where they were promoting this big new preacher, and he's like, "You don't want to be a preacher? Come see this preacher." And he gets there, and his friend was tricking him because he was the preacher, and then he
Interesting.
unexpectedly
I knew
had to
he
preach.
could like.
That's the story I've heard.
Yeah, like I knew he had the reputation of preaching very early on, and like from his friends and his family, they're like, "This guy can preach."
Yeah, your buddy Seth did the same thing to you.
Yeah.
that this buddy did to Charles Spurgeon.
In Albany, New York, was the first time I ever preached.
That's
I
awesome.
don't even know the year, but
So okay, back to chronological
Yeah,
order.
so back
So now
chronological-
you're just drinking from the fire hose of
love and
of-
theology. I'm back with Seth, and right around that time is when the Bible study that Chris is running turns into a church. So Romans is over. I ask him, "What do we do after Romans?" He says, "We're starting a church. An Eternal City Church was planted."
still exists.
Still
to this day?
exists. Started in Chris's living room, the early days, and now they're a strong, healthy church. They're coming on 10 years. Like, yeah,
It's
really.
awesome.
They might be past actually. I don't think they're past 10 years. But so I was not like on the team right away with Eternal City Church, but I was a fan. Like I was going to a different church with my family at the time when they first started, but I would go often. But I wasn't like part of the initial core planting team. And then so is that was happening, and then Seth came back in my life, so I got to travel and speak more, and now I got to say more of what I was learning and got to speak more. I never learned how to preach or speak ever in my life. I just got the opportunity, and then if it's bad, I was like, well, I was born stuttering, so that's why it's not good. It's like, let him have a shot, you know. This is kind of just kind of sneak in under the radar.
The handicap card.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let me try. Yeah, and so anyway, man, I'm getting lost. So
you're an adult now.
I'm an adult, still doing home improvement work. That would be
You end up becoming an electrician.
Yeah, I was like general home improvement. We did all kind of things, and then ended up being an electrician for the last like 5 years of that. But yeah, always did like handyman stuff. Always worked on houses, all parts of them for the most part. So I was doing that for a job, single at the time, and I would do trips with Seth when he had them. Not getting paid for any of that. And then helping, and then there would be a point in there that I would leave the church I was going to with my family and help Eternal City Church. And so all of my free time was ministry for that period of time. It was years, you know. And so work, make money, and then give all my time to ministry work. And it was during that time that like the third love would show up, as love for the church, because I had, and not that I hated the church, but I thought maybe I would like start an independent ministry and go that route. Seem more free. And
Yeah, you can get swept up. I'm going to be very careful. Sometimes there's this thought out there that like the real ministry happens not confined to the church.
yeah, at least I thought that. Yeah, I would have thought that early on. I would have thought like that's like the real ministry is done when a person with passion just says, "Don't tell me what to do. I'm gonna go and preach the word. And
Navy SEAL ministries.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I was like, send me to a jungle somewhere, and I'll just like build a house and preach the gospel and make a church here
and eat bugs.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, and so the church wasn't a part of my. Like, it wasn't a part of it. It was not that I hated it, but it was just not a part of it. So in planting a church, I really grew a love for the church and like God's structure of the authority and how he set up the local church. And so that was like the last step of what I needed to gain, was like the passion for God and his glory going out, learning what all that means through theology, and then a love for his church. And so it was during serving with Eternal City Church that I think I discerned, and this is what I'm going on now, is my purpose in life is planting healthy churches among my people of Western Pennsylvania. That's what I think I'm built to do.
Sunshine, doesn't it like sound like our mission statement?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so that's why I'm here, really, if I could, say it in a sentence. Yeah. And so, that leads us up to coming to Harvest. That's what I meant.
Well, yeah. So I'm realizing now that Mike should be here, but we're going to go ahead and tell his story without him. Somewhere in this time frame, you have a run-in with Mike.
I meet Mike at an ice cream shop,
and you get the rare privilege in my historical experience here of being an outsider invited to come preach at Harvest.
Yeah, I met Mike at an ice cream shop.
With no credentials?
No.
So you meet Mike at an ice cream shop. Let's start there.
Meet Mike at an ice cream shop.
In what, Squirrel Hill or something? Shady Side?
Yeah. It's, I forget the name of it now. It's like a famous like homemade ice cream joint there. They got awesome ice cream. But I was actually on a date. This is before I met... It was like a date. It's before I met my wife. I met Mike, and the guy he was with knew the girl that I was on a date with, and they were really good friends. And so they were talking, and I was stuck with Mike. Yeah, it worked out. Again, Providence.
I like
Not
it.
my choice at the moment.
Actually, it kind of was probably annoying at the moment.
Oh, yeah, I didn't like it at the moment. But then he started talking about church, and he was a pastor, and I was like, and then I had my interest, yeah. So after that, I met Mike. He invited me up to Harvest to see what they're doing there. Wanted to hear more about Eternal City Church, and we met a few times. We talked a few times. He asked me if I would preach. That was 2019, I'm pretty sure. And I preached here once, and then kind of faded away. Like I said, I was a Harvest fan, but was still a part of Eternal City Church. In that time is when I met my wife. We got married. That's right around COVID time. We got married in like the middle of COVID craziness. 2020, we got married.
Lovely Katie Geramita.
Yes. Yeah. We met at a summer camp that I would spend some time volunteering at. She worked there full time.
Miracle Mountain Ranch. Mountain Ranch up north.
Good camp. Yeah, good camp.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of a funny story. How we met. She had been there for 7 years. I had been going there for a long time, and like we knew each other, but like never really talked. And I don't want to get into the whole thing.
Yeah, we don't want all the details.
Yeah, but it was like there was like one moment where I noticed her.
Yeah, like all of a sudden,
first
like,
time.
Where have you been?
She was riding in the bed of a truck. Because we were like out in like the woods, and she was coming out with a team that was coming out to where we were. She was in the bed of the truck, hair in the wind, and I was like, it was in the morning, so I was like just like waking up, and I saw her, and I was like, I need to talk to her.
You have to forgive us, ladies. Sometimes we're just not very observant.
Again, Providence. I think if we would have started talking earlier, she probably wouldn't have liked me all that much.
Yeah. There you go. It's God's timing.
Yeah, God's timing.
And we can be dumb. We can be in your presence for quite a long time before we're finally
it took me a while. But
have you been here before? It's like, I've been around you forever.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get married. COVID happens. I don't know if you guys remember. COVID was a thing.
COVID happens.
The world goes crazy.
The world goes crazy. And again, it was one of those things where at the start of it, I would have never thought that during all of that, I would have ended up leaving Eternal City Church that I loved and still love and would be there. You have to pry it from my cold dead hands. Like I love that church that I would leave there and go anywhere else. But God has a way of just taking things from you and giving you what he wants.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not. And I mean, and it turned out in this situation, we all liked it. It all seemed to make sense, but I would have never saw it. And it was like, the idea was, okay, you've gone through this whole journey, your life, you're married now. You think it's your calling to plant churches among your people in Western Pennsylvania. Maybe you need to go to a place where they're doing that. And it's not that Eternal City Church isn't, it's just, it just became clear where it was not clear before. It became clear, and I thought that was so. I talked to my pastor Chris. He thought that was so. Mike thought that was so, and so I came here not to work. I just came here to be a part of it. I
remember. So at the time, I was just going to Natrona Heights. We had just moved into the Grace Methodist building. Mm-hmm. We were sharing a space with them while we looked for a building. Yeah, and I remember you and Katie showing up. And so we were just churchgoers together. With Pastor Andy. Andy Summers was the Natrona Heights pastor at the time.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're a harvester. You end up going through the membership class.
Went through the eldership training, and then thought this was going to be it. I was just going to be a leader in harvest, see what God had planned. And in my mind, I was like, I think I want to be a pastor. I want to do this. And I was like, let's have like a 10-year road was where I was at. Let's be a member of a church in the community that we live. 10 years from now, maybe I'll pray about like if God wants me to plant.
Humility in God's timing.
Yeah. I mean, I was happy and we were doing awesome things and it was great.
Yeah. And then God just axes Andy out of your spot. And opens up the door much quicker
God
than you
rips things out of your life.
I'm joking. God did not axe Andy. We love Andy Summers. I very much personally love Andy Summers, and he is a lead pastor at a church in the state of Indiana now.
Yes.
So Andy ends up getting called with his family to go be a lead pastor at an awesome church. So we're still all in touch with Andy, but that left a vacancy, and it kind of, I'm remembering, well, I'm interested in your perspective. I remember Harvest leadership at the time, just kind of like letting it sit for a minute.
Yeah. They let us three, me, you, and Sean, were the elders in training at the time. We were just elder.
It was like, anybody going to raise their hand?
Candidates at the time. And they were just letting us carry on.
Mm-hmm. We were still able to do church.
Yeah, we were still able to do church, and they just let us carry on. It was actually Andy was the first one who was like, you should think about taking that job.
Go, Andy.
Yeah, he was the first one that actually said it to me. I find out now that people had been thinking it before me.
I thought it.
I wouldn't have thought anyone thought it. I felt embarrassed even suggesting that they could consider me. I really did. Well, because all of my credentials, if you want to call it that, is just experience. It's just volunteer.
Welcome to Harvest.
Experience and study. And so I thought like, well, that's not true. I did do some Bible school, but I don't know if it's the homeschool part of me. I'm just not wired for traditional school. And so I was like, I'll just do stuff.
Yeah, but you're not void of knowledge. Like,
I try not to be.
I'd put you up against any, 22-year-old Bible school graduate. So anyway, so you raise your hand.
Yeah.
And almost simultaneously.
Yeah. The shepherd's hook comes in from off screen.
Yeah.
Wraps around
almost simultaneously. So this is fun because like Vince and I became quick buddies.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, Vince and I are going through elder candidate training together with a couple other guys that we're close with, and we're all friends and hanging out because we're going to what is still the smallest campus.
Yep.
So we all know each other very well.
Still
it's definitely the coolest. I can't play favorites now, but it's the coolest. Yeah, I felt very comfortable with Vince being my pastor. So right at that same time is when Big Fred decides to retire. And that's when a few people approached me and said, hey, I think you might be a great fit for this if you feel called at all to do it. And long story short, we ended up coming on staff at the exact same time. Like we had the same official hiring date.
Same day.
We were filling out HR paperwork together.
Yeah.
So Vince and I went from just being dudes in a church that then we're going to be elders in a church together.
Maybe elders too.
On
Pastors
staff
in the church.
Yeah. So we had our ordination boards back to back too.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting experience.
Yeah, those were fun.
So let me.
I was just thinking about the ordination boards. Yours was before mine. And I was nervous. And I asked you how to go, and you sent me a text. Do you remember what you said to me?
I do. I think I said that was absolutely the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my life, I think is what I said.
And I was starting to feel good the night before, and I was like, let's see how his went. I was expecting, like, not that bad, don't sweat it. You were like, the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my life.
It was,
and
I felt very
started
uncomfortable.
To worry. And I was like, oh, I should start worrying now. Because if Will can't do it, I don't think I can do it.
Yeah, it was stressful,
it was
but
good.
appropriately so.
I ended up not thinking it was that bad. I mean, there was definitely times I was like, oh no, they're gonna know.
They're gonna know.
They're gonna know that I don't know anything.
I am not qualified for this at all, and now they all see it loud and clear.
But yeah, and so that brings us up to date. I like to say that's the story of how I became everyone's third favorite campus pastor of the Natrona Heights campus. Mike Harvey is still, I still talk to people who openly tell me Mike Harvey is their favorite campus pastor. And I'm like, thank you for telling me that. So Mike, we all love you. No,
he might even be my favorite campus pastor.
He's my favorite campus pastor. I wasn't even here when he was a campus pastor.
I'm also biased because he baptized me.
All the stories I hear is like, man, I should do that.
Well, I'm sure everyone listening from Petrolia Valley knows why people have that feeling. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of love for all the pastors here.
Yeah, there's no.
So you've been, let's see, July 2023, I think.
Yeah, something.
So what? We're approaching 2 years.
Yep, getting up on 2 years.
How you feel? Any
Great.
summary thoughts? Any
great?
Thoughts on being a pastor? Thoughts on?
Yeah, I love being a pastor. I think I'm right that's what I'm supposed to do, and I'm happy to do it here. That's the overall. I love the people of Harvest. I love the church in general, and yeah, it's a fun job. For me, so I come from like right before I became a pastor and was sitting at campus pastor meeting. I was literally crawling through a giant house, rewiring the whole thing. So I went from like a very physical job to a not so very physical job, and that took some change. I went from just, coming home just covered in dust and soot every day to like part of your job is going to people's houses and eating
lunch
food and so that was like a mind change. I was like, I need to be doing something or fixing something.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any projects I can do.
Careful.
I know. I've learned.
The list will be extensive immediately.
You know where to find me.
Well, so I don't know. I know some stories that you didn't share that I'm thinking.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'm wondering.
Oh no.
Why no one has just, we should do it live on the air. Why no one has just cast the demon out of your throat yet?
Oh, they have?
We got to hear that story, man. Because you've been through a bunch of different denominations.
Yeah.
So you've
So
been
the
in
one
some
church
very
I was at
charismatic
is actually the
churches.
same church that I first preached at. It might have been the same trip. I don't know. I was there a few times. It was in Albany, New York. And so yeah, the circles I would run in that time when I was with Seth were very charismatic. Believed in healing, which I believe in healing, but they believe in. So I'll
We
just
believe
say
in the
what,
Holy Spirit too.
I'll just say what would happen. I would call them ambush healings, where I would be like hanging out in places, and this happened to me in not this one church, all kind of different churches, where people would hear me stutter, and they'd be like, "We can fix that. We believe that God can take that from him," and that they believe that would be God's will, and so they would not ask, grab my throat, and start to pray. Very passionately. Again, these are passionate people that love God and believe what he can do. And that's what they were doing to my throat. And so that would happen a few times. It never really worked. One time in Albany, New York, there was a dude there. I don't even know who he is. He was a traveling dude, called himself a prophet. And he was doing a couple like services there. And one it was before the first service. All of us who were like the staff, he wanted to have a time to pray for each of us. So we all lined up, and he would go down the road and ask you your name, and then he would pray for you. And I recall the one guy next to me, he prayed for the guy next to me, and his prophecy and prayer over him was that he was going to be rich. That's what he said to the guy. He's like, "You are going to be wealthy, and billions of dollars will pass through your hands, and you will do mighty things with it." And then he gets to me. He's like, "What's your name?" I'm like, "Vincent." And he goes, "All right, hand on the throat." Right? He knew
I'm
what
gonna
to do.
choke slam you
He
like
knew
the
what to do.
Undertaker.
And he had a very, he would talk in a very confident way. And he would pray, and he prayed that the demon of stuttering would be taken out of me. Theologically, I don't think it's a demon. He did, and he prayed that it
Could
would
be,
leave.
but
Maybe
not.
Yeah, I don't know. He thought it was, and he prayed that it would leave. And when he stopped, it sure felt like it did. Like, so when you stutter, if there's any other stutterers out there, you can attest. Like, you feel the disfluency. Like, you kind of know when it's coming. And as you get older, at least in my experience, well, okay, so there's some people who stutter due to injury, and for them, it's a lot harder. If you've like damaged your brain, it's a lot harder to control it. It's a more persistent stutter. But for people like me that are kind of born with it, and the best way to say it is you don't grow out of it. So a lot of people stutter as kids, some don't grow out of it. And they're not really sure why, but there's things you can do where you kind of feel it coming, and you can kind of slow down, and you can change the way you talk, and you can hide it. Well, I didn't have to do that anymore. It just felt like a stream. So like, if you imagine like feeling choppy water to feeling smooth water, that's what it felt like inside of me.
That's
there was
awesome.
An actual change. And I was like, this is cool. And I even called my mom. I was like, I don't stutter anymore. And I was telling people, like, this is amazing. I've been healed. And we went through the whole day. I remember we went to a Chinese restaurant to eat, and it was driving back from that. I'm talking to the guys, and I don't know what I said, but I stuttered like pretty hard. I was like, "Hey guys, when," and I just stopped and pretended like it didn't happen. Everyone kind of pretended like it didn't happen, and I was silent the rest of the ride back. We stayed at the church. We were sleeping in the basement of the church, and I was like, "All right, it's fine. Don't psych yourself out." And I went to talk again, and I stuttered. The worst stuttering of my life was in that basement that night. It was like syllables were stuck in my throat. It was just, it was like, it felt almost like being mute. Like, it was just,
Oh man.
it was bad. And the worst part was none of my friends or the people that traveled with me really wanted to like look at me. They were just kind of like, they didn't know this didn't fit, right? Because you have a lot of passion.
You're Job.
Yeah, that they wanted to comfort me.
What secret sin?
But they wanted to comfort me, but they didn't know how. And again, when you have a lot of passion and you don't like put the pieces together and try to figure out how God's doing things, and like, I guess I'll say it like this: in my experience, theology helped this. At the time, I was very ashamed. I was very
and like heartbroken, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was very ashamed of it. I was just like, and so no one would look at me. And we were sleeping in the basement of the church, and like in like the kids' room, they had like those like vinyl foam gymnastics blocks.
Yes.
I built a little fort out of them, and I crawled inside it, and I just fell asleep in the darkness of the basement there.
Like Gollum.
And I woke up the next day, and it was back to normal. Back to my normal choppy water voice. And at the time even, I took that as a rebuke of this idea that God wanted this out of my life. And for some reason it was still there. I took it as God was showing me, I can make you fluent. I can take away your voice altogether if I want. The power of the tongue is mine.
Amen.
And I have you right where you want you. I've got the dial set where it needs to be. And I was confident from that point on. I was always kind of confident about it, but that was maybe like the last like spiritual sense that like this is God's will, that I have it. And so
I know we make light of it a lot. I mean, well, particularly, once you're with buddies, but I can imagine, particularly being younger, even now, like, I can imagine it being a very heavy thing, like Paul wanting rid of the thorn in his side.
Yeah, like especially as a teenager. And like now I feel frustration when it's like I want to communicate better and I can't.
Yeah.
But like as a kid, I was particularly hard-headed about it. A lot of kids would just not talk. And I would still talk, and I would just the whole way through it, and you would have to deal with it. That was as a kid.
I got something to say.
Yeah, and
I'm
then as a
get
teenager,
it out.
I did like, envy other people that were fluent. And it's like one of those things, like you don't think about how blessed you are to have two hands, but if you didn't have one, you would be like, man, another hand would be really nice right now.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people don't think about how blessed they are to be able to just fluently talk. And for me, it helps me to think about what I say, like early on. You have to think through what you say, and that saved me from saying a lot of dumb things. You think a thought and you say it. I have a natural check valve that's like you can't say it,
which actually can be a huge blessing.
Yeah, which is and so it's something that you can think through. Is like God does bless a lot of people with the ability to speak fluently, and what you say is important, right? And so I take that as, maybe if I was fluent more than I am, I would have a very reckless tongue. And God maybe had to pull me back and give me that. I don't know his mind, but I know that I see it as a blessing now. Like as the years go on, it's becoming more and more of a pure blessing in my life, and less of a blessing and a curse. We say that it's a blessing and a curse. It's becoming a pure blessing.
That's beautiful, man.
As we go on.
Well, it's even, for being a teenager, how much retrospective coloring you're doing, I don't know, but like to be a teenager and at least have some inclination from that experience that like, if God wanted it gone, he could make it gone.
Yeah.
And if he wanted me to not be able to talk at all, he could do that too. So clearly he wants me to have this.
Yeah.
That's a really mature perspective to be able to glean.
It was just in my head when I woke up the next day. It was like, that was the point of this lesson that you taught was I'm in control.
A lot of we all need to come to that lesson, and sometimes the things he uses to get that lesson in your head can be much more uncomfortable than stuttering. Yeah. So, interesting. Well, thank you for that story. I knew the throat grab healing story, and I thought it's good. We got some good at it. Yeah. So, that's Vince's.
That's me.
Truncated how we got to Harvest Church life story.
Best I can remember.
And hey, all I can say, and I know everyone else feels this way that knows you, is just super blessed as a church family to have you, and very glad that the Lord sees fit to bring young men like you
thank you.
into our presence. So
that's a very nice thing for you to say.
I mean, not that we didn't like Mike Harvey or Andy Summers, but
they're gone.
But they're gone. So you're who we got.
Yeah,
okay. So that was special segment 1.
Yes.
In our only official podcast. So we'll call that Vince's story. But we are still going to touch on 2 of our traditional segments today. So our next segment is going to be topics from previous sermons. So doctrinal or theological topics from previous sermons. And one particularly hot topic from recent sermons is the use of strong language. When's it appropriate? When's it inappropriate? How do we use language in a biblical fashion when sometimes the culture may not like the language that the Bible uses? And I can think of many contexts for that. So in one of our recent sermons, preacher was going through Luke 11, 29 through 32, and the word damnation came up in the sermon. Talking about the queen of the south and the Ninevites were going to condemn the Jews of this generation, and then a paraphrase of that was given from the stage where it was, that's them basically saying, God damn them. And so you got the strong use of the word GD.
And as somebody who grew up in a Christian home.
Yeah, get soap in your mouth.
Yes, that shuddered me.
Yeah.
But it's a word that the Bible uses. So
yeah, so let's talk about that. So should that word shudder you?
Well, yeah. I mean, we're talking about probably the most serious pronouncement you can get.
Yeah, it's like the scariest thing ever, right? We were talking in community group from this passage about thoughts on Judgment Day. Like what emotions are evoked in you when you think about the end of days and the book of your life being opened in the presence of the throne. Sure. And so without Christ, like that phrase, the idea of condemnation, eternal separation from God, should be like the most shuddering thing on the planet. So then I guess the necessary question then is that appropriate language ever? If it is, how do you qualify that? Under what circumstances is it appropriate and when is it inappropriate? Because like you said, like that would have got soap in my mouth as a kid, which I guess standing here as a parent, I would say under certain circumstances, I would still agree with
Almost any circumstances a child would use that phrase is probably not appropriate.
All right, so flesh that out. So appropriate versus inappropriate use of that specific phrase, and then we can go into other ideas of strong language.
Yeah, I mean, so, this is interesting because we just got done talking about how I had a different perspective on the words I use because I have to think about them more when I talk. But so what we're talking about here is a reality. So God is in the heavens. He does as he pleases, the Bible says. He pronounces blessings. He pronounces curses or condemnations. And so to be condemned by God is a serious thing. To pronounce a curse by God is a serious thing. And he does it all the time in the Bible. So the actual words, the written down words, there can't be anything wrong with them. They can't be evil words because God uses them.
And they're found in the Word.
They're found in the Word. God used them. Now the question is, how do we use them? And it makes me think of the sin of taking the Lord's name in vain, right? Taking the Lord's name in vain is... So when I grew up in a Christian home, there'd be like certain words, if you say that word, you've taken the Lord's name in vain. It had nothing to do with the content of the conversation you were having or even your thoughts about God. It was if you said this word, if you said GD is the way that we would abbreviate it as a kid, you said the Lord's name in vain. But really, the phrase, as we just said, God uses that terminology himself. So the phrase isn't wrong. The problem is I'm saying it. The problem is a weak mortal person is taking the judgment of God and I'm pronouncing it on people. I'm saying I'm the judge and I say you're wrong, and I'm taking the Lord's name in vain and I'm using it for the most trivial things. Maybe I spilled coffee on myself and I use the most powerful, most final,
scariest, ultimate
announcement you can have.
Yeah.
And I say it about something trivial in my life. And so what that's saying is you're doing two wrong things. You're saying I am in the place of God, or you're saying God is either at my level or he's not even real. Like God's,
because it's like flippant. Like if you say GD to spilling the coffee,
sure,
it's almost as if God's not real and God's pronouncement of condemnation is not even,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't even matter. I'm using it on an inanimate object.
So that's where you're taking God's name and you're using it in vain. You're connecting it to something that is far below the station where it should be used. And so, most of the time, I probably shouldn't use that phrase.
Yeah,
I would be wrong to use it 99.9% of the times I could utter it in my life.
To piggyback, so I like that. So on one hand, it's like there's two wrongs. So you touched on the vanity part. Like when you're just using, when you curse, which is where the word curse comes from, because damnation is a curse, is being accursed. So when you curse and say GD to something flippant, like I fell over or the chair broke, it's vain because you're acting as though God wasn't there. And shout out to Joel Cortalesso, my other St. James Catholic school brethren from this church. I remember specifically from Sister Mary Agnes, my nun first grade teacher, when a first grader in my class flippantly used that term and received some swift discipline. She then also admonished all of us that it's not only the vanity of it, but it's an imperative command to God. Like you're commanding God as if he's submissive to you to do something that he only has the authority to pronounce judgment. So even if you say it towards another human, which would be the worst case, because now you're not using it in vanity, but you're now blaspheming because you're putting yourself in the throne above God and giving him a command because you're the one pronouncing judgment. And that's reserved for God in the Bible. So that there's like a two-part no-no there, if I remember from Sister Mary Agnes, is one, you don't want that person to be damned. We want to bring that person the gospel.
Yes.
And two, it's not your place whatsoever to command God to do something that he reserves authority to do. So those would be inappropriate uses. So let's talk about potentially places where it may be appropriate to use such language.
Well, if you're saying what God has already said, you're pretty safe. If you're saying God said this and you're reading from the Bible, you're safe. And in fact, you probably shouldn't say anything else other than Scripture after you've just said God said this. It's a pretty safe rule. And so here in our text, did you read the text?
I didn't read the text.
So the pertinent part of the text is verse 31. It says, "The queen of the south will rise up at judgment of the men of this generation and condemn them." That's the word that we are paraphrasing here. It's a valid paraphrase of that word. "For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here." So what Jesus is saying is this queen came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, which was from God. God gave Solomon wisdom. Solomon spoke that, and here was a person who was not in the people of God. She didn't know God personally, but his wisdom and his words was so important to her. She traveled from all over the world to hear it. And Now these guys, the audience, they have something that Jesus is saying, I'm greater than Solomon.
They have the Lord of glory in front of them.
I am the thing that Solomon was pretending to be, is what he's saying. Something greater than Solomon is here, and you are, let alone not traveling to hear the words of God from my mouth, but you are insulting me. You are insulting what is being said. The one greater than Solomon, you're rejecting. And so this queen will rise up and condemn you for that. And so
then that's basically like, then if you take her first person, imagine her first person standing in front of them, she would say like, may you be damned. Like,
by God, not by her,
right?
Not by anybody else, but by God. She would say that. So I think the paraphrase is certainly valid.
Right.
And so that's a case that I think you can say those words. And the reason why you might is because we read condemn and we don't think about what that means sometimes. And so you can, especially when you are venturing to teach the Bible, you need to do some work to take words in the Bible that might not mean as much to the contemporary listener, and you can use words that'll sit a little bit heavier in the ears of the people who are hearing you.
Yeah, and I think what I don't really want to get into is like, okay, there's a whole nuanced, long conversation you could have on like preaching critique of like, okay, when is a wise moment to use it and not, the context of the congregation, does the congregation...
We'd love to talk about that sometime
yeah,
if you want to.
but right, but not here, right? So there's like, okay, wisdom and when not to emphasize this point over another point in this text, but we're just talking about the basic use of the language.
Yeah.
My thought always goes to another spot in the Bible where I think translators, could use the GD word or at least the D word more, but we read over it, and because it's old-timey language, we don't recognize it. My mind immediately goes to Galatians 1:8, where Paul is telling the church to not listen to any other gospel. It says, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. You hear that, let him be accursed, it just washes right over you. You don't get the heaviness of it. He's saying GD right there. Like it's the same thought. It's the same. He's saying, let him be damned. May God damn him if he brings you a false gospel.
Yes.
There's a bunch of places in scripture where you see this strong type of language applied in different situations. So this makes me want to go back to this idea of cursing in general. Naughty words. I think Mike and I have talked about it before on a podcast, but I can't remember. We've kind of all lumped them into one category, but the phrase or the colloquialism cursing comes from the GD phrase, the damnation phrase, because it's a curse.
Yes,
which would be actually slightly different than other naughty word categories, like swearing. You shouldn't swear to God. I swear to God. You hear that kids say that a lot, right? I used to say that when I was a kid. But you see Jesus rebuke and admonish us to
specifically not
to do that. So that's where the term swearing comes from. So swearing is different than cursing. And then you also get like obscenities. So we find it impolite normally, less nowadays, but traditionally impolite in society to talk about like sex or bathroom humor, because that's obscene. The word obscene comes from off stage. Like if you think about a play, those are things that happen behind scenes, like behind the scenes. It's like behind the scene footage from a movie. Like, we all know we go to the bathroom, and sex isn't a dirty thing. It's a good thing that God created. It's just like impolite generally.
Yeah, there's a place for it to be, and if it's not there, it becomes obscene.
It becomes obscene. Like, and the same thing with vulgarity. Like, the root word vulgar, as best as I remember, is Latin from the word common. It's like common language. It's
I believe so.
if you've heard of the Latin Vulgate, which was the first Latin translation of the Bible, it was called the Vulgate because Latin at the time was the common language of the people.
Yeah.
So it being translated from Greek and Hebrew into Latin was it being made available to the commoner. So it was why it was called the Vulgate. So vulgarity could be an even broader term of like you're hanging out with the iron workers and you're using, slang and maybe a little off color language. That's a whole separate category. So
Sure.
I always think that's fun to think about those. They're not all the same. In our modern lingo, we just have, like you said, dirty words. If you hear this word, automatically bad. But just like exegeting the Bible, I think context is king.
Yeah.
Like, it's not always inappropriate to talk about sex,
Sure.
right? It's like time and place.
Yep.
But then there are definitely places where talking about sex is obscene.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
uncomfortable for people. So
Yeah.
I think I'd love to get your take. Like this is like leads into a broader discussion in my mind of like just the assault on language in general from the world. Recently, Mike and I talked about the world, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. And it's so noticeable these days how the world just wants to take ownership of the dictionary. They take words that have very specific meanings because they're God's words, and God is the one who imbued meaning into his world. And they want to keep the word and change the meaning.
Yeah.
The first place my mind goes is like marriage.
Sure.
Like marriage is a very specific thing. It's God's institution that he created and gets to define, and then we've historically used this word to mean that one thing, and now we just use those same letters and sounds, marriage, all over the place, but have attributed a totally different meaning to it.
So words are very powerful. Theologically, the word, right? The word became flesh. God created everything with words, and then John tells us that power is Jesus himself. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. Words are not meaningless. And it makes me think of James. I'm not going to read all that James has to say about in the passage that's usually titled Taming the Tongue. James 3:2. It says this: "For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body." And so what it's saying is, if you are able to control your tongue, control your words and what you say, you will have been the type of person, you will have already mastered everything about yourself. And there's a lot. It even goes as far as to say that it's like a fire, set on fire by hell, is what the Bible says about the tongue. And so as Christians, as those who are called by God or given the message of the gospel to share, our call isn't just to not say lists of words, right? It's not, here's a list, don't say it. If that's what God wanted, he would have made a list. He'd have provided a list. We don't have a list. But what we do have is to control our tongue, to realize the power of our tongue. And so if you believe that you are righteous because you don't say a list of words, that's like kindergarten of what James is saying here. That's like preschool. That's there's much more mature thoughts to have about what it means to control your tongue. In this passage, he talks about it has the power to build up or tear down. And so do you think about not saying a list of naughty words, or do you think of, are my words coming out of my mouth into my brother's ears, and are they intended to build him up or bring him down? That's much more important than whether or not our culture in this time deems that a naughty word. Especially these days, words get invented. You spend time with young people. I'm not that old. Spend time with young people these days. I'm terrified of saying a new inappropriate word that's invented. Words change in their meaning all the time. So things like that, things like accuracy. Are you actually saying what you mean to say? That is a much closer idea of what James is saying here than just my whole life I've never said the 4-letter words that we're not supposed to say in our culture right now. And there is, as you're saying, a battle of language. Like, words do change, and sometimes in nefarious ways. The one that comes to mind for me, they call the nonsense where they mutilate people's bodies because they feel they were born in the wrong body, which is a irrational thought, right? It's not true.
It's an oxymoron.
It's not true. God made you, if you're hearing this, God made you the way he intended to make you, whether you stutter or not. He made you that way. And so people are feeling they're born in the wrong body, specifically born male should be female or the other way around. The right thing to do is to affirm to them God did not make a mistake. But what our culture says is they use the word affirming to do the exact opposite. They say, I'm going to tell you God did make a mistake. You are wrong. And I'm going to call that affirming. That is a severe twisting of language. And so I guess what I'm saying in all of this is my call is you're right to think language is serious. It's even more serious. And as pastors and as Christians, we should take it very seriously, how words are used, and that they're used in the right place. In the case of our sermon we just heard, I think it's very valid to paraphrase a word God already used in a way that makes an impact to us. It made an impact to me. I listened when he said that, and so it took that part of the text. I heard someone say one time, when you preach, your job is to let the text talk, and I think that's what happened there. Is the text is saying something through his words. He let it talk to me because I was awakened by the word he used. Like, oh yeah, that is what's happening here.
Yeah, and it's heavy.
Yeah, and so I would say that is a good, accurate use of words, and to continue
valid,
to be passionate.
Not necessarily saying you would have done the same thing or not.
No.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Who knows how I would have preached that sermon? It was definitely had more stuttering in it.
Well, and the other thing I think of too when I'm thinking about this is just that, like, the Bible is we've kind of imported, in my mind, a lot of like the last couple centuries of like piety into the Bible, particularly through a lot of the English translations used, but like particularly the Old Testament. Like, the Bible's got crazy, real world, gritty, sinful, human stories in it. I mean, and a lot of that sometimes gets paper machéed over, made less clear to us because of like the type of language or translation used.
Sure.
Like, I'm thinking specifically about Elijah on the mountain ridiculing and mocking the prophets of Baal.
He's mocking a demon god
who doesn't exist. And like, if we were to bring that into modern English, warning, if you have young children listening, you might want to pull them away. But I think it would be a valid, whether or not it would be wise in a sermon, it would be a valid paraphrase in modern English to say, what, is your God on the shitter or something? Like, he's making fun of them, and he's using crude language to try to wake up the onlookers that this God doesn't exist. And like, so he's using obscenity and vulgarity there to like mock a non-real blasphemous
or
idolatry.
Even, or even talk about a use of language. You just made me think in like a practical sense. Like my dad was a police officer. Sometimes police officers are in very high stress situation. You have the opportunity sometimes to use strong language to get someone to stop doing a harmful action before you shoot them, right? So would you say, I don't use bad words, so I'm not going to use these words that will certainly get this man's attention and maybe go a long way, or do I shoot him, right? And so there is a practicality, and when a prophet is talking to false prophets of a demon god who's not real, who are
misleading his nation,
who are
into
bringing,
damnation,
like serious things are happening here. That prophet can very easily use language that you wouldn't use when you're teaching a Sunday school. There's different speed limits on different roads for a reason,
right?
And I think for a mature Christian, there's different speed limits even in the way we talk. And we all do that. We all do that, and we're all accountable to God for how we use our language. That's I think the general principle here. And so what was happening in our text is certainly serious. This isn't just a little thing that these guys are doing. So these guys are studying the Old Testament, the Bible. Throughout the Old Testament, Jesus is prophesied and expected, and they're waiting for Jesus himself. That's what the whole Bible,
which is why they all keep asking, is he the Messiah? They know that
this is pointing to one guy, and there he stands, and they're rejecting him. This is a serious thing, more serious than a cop having an altercation with somebody, even more serious than a false prophet proclaiming their false god. This is real God. God is in front of you, and you're rejecting him.
Not only rejecting him, but then like admonishing and leading your subjects away from him,
leading other people away from him.
Yeah. So anyway, the language conversations to me is so interesting.
And not to belabor the point, but later on in this text, Jesus is going to pronounce 6 different woes on these guys and even call them fools. So you're fools. Like he goes into detail on why they're wrong. For exactly this point, this is not a light topic.
No, it basically tells them they're on the road to damnation.
Yes, he calls them. Where's the passage? He calls them graves that have been covered over. He's like, you are graves. The grass has grown over, and the Jewish culture standing on a good grave is very unclean. He's giving them like the worst insult you can possibly say, where he's saying, you are unclean and you're hidden. So you're unknowingly making people unclean.
And that's what I mean about the cultural loss. The cultural context is lost. Like in that culture at that time, calling someone a covered over grave, it was probably very equivalent to us using some vulgar insults.
Sure.
To someone, it would be that much of an affront, and we don't pick up on that because we're like, well, it's not in my list.
It's not in my list
of asterisk words that I'm not allowed to say.
Yeah, it's certainly an insulting thing for them to hear.
Yeah.
But I would even say that Jesus even is doing this out of love.
Well, and that's the ultimate qualification.
Right. So Jesus is following what we read in James. Like he's the perfect man. So even the words are like, man, that's harsh. We know that Jesus is the perfect man, so he is speaking out of love. Where it says, if anyone can tame their tongue, they're a perfect man. Jesus is a perfect man, so you can work it backwards. He's taming his tongue perfectly.
Which means he's using it appropriately.
Which means this is love, what Jesus is saying.
Even
foolish,
even harsher
graves. That's the loving thing for Jesus to say.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we can say about that.
Well,
there's more to say, but
there's plenty more to say. And with that, I would say going back to the world's assault on language, I would encourage everybody to not, there's a time and a place, but I try to seed, CEDE, not SEED. I try to give up as little ground linguistically as possible given the context of the scenario. And what I mean by that is like, I personally do not use the word marriage if we're not talking about a man and a woman. Now, there are times where if I'm not trying to have this fight, like if it's a point where it's going to be a fight and it's not appropriate, okay, maybe. But like if I'm talking in general with someone, I'm referring to, what do we call it? A legal arrangement between a man and a man. I would, I call that a mirage.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah,
it's not marriage. It can't be.
It's
because
just not.
God came up with it. Even if the country you live in, the state you live in, says it's something that it's not their word. Again, that's taking something that's God's, and that's pretending like it's yours to do what you want with.
Go into like the abortion argument. Like, don't adopt their language because it gives them an out. Like the concepts of it's women's health or pro-choice or bodily autonomy. Those are all attacks on the meanings of those phrases. Like, it's not women's health. There's a 51% chance that the baby is a woman. To me once. What?
During this election cycle, a dude came doing one of those polls, and he came to ask me some things. I was actually cutting the grass. I was wearing a backpack with my son in the backpack, cutting the grass with headphones on, and he's like, "You have time?" And I was like, "This guy wants to talk to me." So I went up and talked to him, and he asked me, "Do you plan to vote this year?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What is the biggest issue for you?" I said, "Well, I'm a Christian, and so protecting the unborn is the biggest issue for me to vote." And he looked at his little iPad, and he said, "Would you want me to put that under women's health or other?" And I was like, there's not a category for that? I was like, and he said no. And then when I said to him, I said, "How many people have answered like me that aren't being heard in your poll?" He's like, "I don't know."
Yeah.
So the words mean something.
Yeah. And they're doing it on purpose for a reason, trying to like obfuscate the true meaning of what's being said, right? It's not women's health. There's a 50-50 chance that the baby's a woman. So we're equally talking about women's death at the same time as we're talking about women's health. And the same thing is like pro-choice. It's not pro-choice. It's pro-abortion or it's pro-death. Even the word abortion is an obfuscation.
Yeah.
We're talking about killing babies.
Ending a life.
Yeah. And the same thing about bodily autonomy. Like I know that one's even more complicated, but bodily autonomy means that like I have autonomy means self-rule.
Yeah.
Autonomy, self-rule, and I have self-rule over my body, and what that one obfuscates is that your body is not the only body at play. There's a second body at play, and you don't have
autonomy.
You don't have rulership over the other body, right?
Sure.
And we would argue as Christians, obviously, you don't have autonomy over your own body.
Sure.
But anyway, so fun things. Maybe for another podcast, we'll get more into language.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about language.
You should be.
Yeah. So we have a great Ask the Pastor. I don't even know if we have time for it. Do you want to do it?
I have time. I mean,
it's a fun one.
Yeah.
I would love to hear what you have to say.
It's a fun one.
All right. So this is from, I can't remember. I know who it's from. I can't remember if he gave me permission, and I'm lazy to look it up. So maybe we'll tell you later. But this is from a young man.
Listener.
Friends with, young listener, congregant. If a pastor is a shepherd, which as I understand means preaching and teaching, then why does the church refer to positions without teaching capacities as pastors for men and directors/managers for women? If a worship leader is female, that's okay because she isn't an authority and teaching over men, but if But if a man held that same role, he would be called a worship pastor. Although this isn't any big concern for us, I believe it's important to be consistent and clear whenever possible. So clarifying between like why people with similar appearing responsibilities would have different offices. I think he's asking like, are we just using language like we just talked about? We're just using semantics to try to stay true to the only men can be pastors thing?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple misconceptions that I think I'm reading into your question, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong. But so I would say you're right about one thing, that you say pastor and shepherd are the same thing. The Bible uses 3 words that there's good reason to believe are talking about one office.
I would say in 2 places grammatically they have to be the same office.
Yes. Yeah.
They're grammatically used interchangeably in the same sentence.
Episkopos, presbyteros, and poimen, I think, is the other one. And those are the 3. Yeah, thank you. Those are the 3 words. And in 2 places in the Bible, 1 Peter 5 and Acts 20, all 3 of those words are used. 2 of them are used to describe the same group of guy, and the other word is used in that same category. So there's good reason to believe that pastor, shepherd, elder, overseer, all of those words are talking about the same guy, which we'll call elder/pastor. So
that's
you're right.
That's a position.
Yeah, that's a position. And what it sounds like, what I would correct about your understanding is you seem to be focused a little bit more than the Bible is on what they do. And the Bible is more focused on who they are. Okay, so you're saying that it means preaching and teaching. Yes, but not just. Okay, so the Bible gives qualifications for who these guys should be. And I would say the first one is calling. So all the elders here, all the pastors and elders here are called. We believe they're called, and that's why we lay hands on them, and they're called to be leaders in the church, shepherds in the church. And you can take the...
Called by who, Vince?
Called by God. Called by God and assessed and affirmed by the other elders. That's how that happens. And so we do our best to try to discern a calling on their life and affirm that and give them a place to exercise that calling. And so what they do, the 2 things they do is teach and rule. Those are like the 2 categories of elders. So teaching doesn't just mean preaching. It could be teaching a Bible study. It could be one-on-one discipleship. It's taking the word of God and rightly applying it to help somebody grow. And
it's like authority of discernment.
Yeah. Yes.
Over the word.
Yes. And then the other thing is ruling, which is just managing the church. And now it's wise that the Bible doesn't give a list of duties of what these guys should do, because culture changes. And even in the year we are now, pastors here are going to do different things than pastors in Africa and pastors all over the world. There's a different set of rules that they might do. And so like
responsibilities.
Yes. Yeah. There's
tasks.
There's different tasks that they might do. So the reason why I think that we have to correct this is because what you say here is that if a worship leader is female, that's okay, because she isn't an authority in teaching over men. But if a man held that same role, he would be called a worship pastor.
Yeah, and I would say that's actually just factually inaccurate.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
We have 5 worship leaders currently.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3 of them are men, 2 of them are women, and only 1 of the 5 is an elder.
Yes.
So we have 4 out of 5 worship leaders are not in the office of overseer, elder, pastor.
We have male worship leaders.
Yes.
Who aren't pastors.
Yeah. So, yep. BJ Hyatt at Natrona Heights and Ian Spiker at Indiana are both men, both worship leaders, and currently neither of them are elders or overseers or pastors, whichever word is your flavor.
Yeah. There are some jobs that we think pastors must do. Preaching is one of those ones that we leave to pastors or potentially people who could be pastors, because we have people from other churches who sometimes come in and preach. We have men who are maybe not officially called to be elders, but are close, or things like that. We don't hold it super tight, but there's certain roles that you must be, at the very least, qualified to be an elder to do. But that doesn't mean that an elder can't do other jobs that someone else could do. All right, so
yeah, and I'm 100% with you. Like, I can think based on gifting. Based on gifting, I could imagine a man being like in an administrative position in the church, but he not feeling called to be a pastor, him not being recognized as being called to be an elder, overseer by other elders or overseers, yet still working for the church and being like a director of administration. Like, just because he's a man would in no way determine whether or not we'd call him the administrative pastor versus the director of administration. So it might seem that way on the outside, but really on the inside, it's two different measurements. So people can have overlapping job responsibilities, but different offices.
Yeah.
And ultimately the office of overseer, elder, what we in modern era call pastors, comes down to really like their authority, less what they absolutely do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So like, an elder, we believe, are the people that God has called to lead his church, to have authority over his church, to do certain things. So their tasks or their responsibilities will vary wildly. I think later on in your question, you say something about if a man is in charge of youth or children, that in your understanding that they should be called the same as a woman who would do that job. The answer is maybe. But if he's a pastor and doing that job, just because he's doing a job that you don't have to be a pastor to do, doesn't change his calling.
Right. Or change his station.
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't change his station.
Right.
I'm a pastor here at church. Just the other day, I was helping someone put up ceiling fans in their house. I still retained the title of pastor while I was doing that, even though you certainly don't need a pastor to put up ceiling fans in your house. So yeah, I think the big thing here, it's less about what they do and more about who they are. And the main thing there is calling.
Yeah.
Calling to be a leader in God's church.
Yeah. And then the teaching and preaching thing as part of the qualifications.
Yeah.
Able to. So hopefully that was helpful and clarifying.
I would just say one other thing that's more of a harvest thing is we have elders and pastors. We use two different words. And I know we just said those words mean the same thing, and they do. So if you hear some people referred to as elders and some referred to as pastors, that's something that we do for ease. And all that means is the people who are called pastors, we use that term for the people who are elders. They're still elders, but they get paid full time to do their eldering job. The ones who are still elders, the same as the full time guys, they get paid from their other job and not by the church. And we use the term elder primarily for them and pastor primarily for the paid guys. But it would be completely appropriate to flip flop those and call your favorite non-harvest paid elder pastor, whoever.
Yeah, Pastor Jim.
Pastor Jim. You could very easily do that, and probably should in the case of Jim.
Yeah. Shout out to Jim. You know who you are. Yeah, so that's funny. It's like, it's just a practice. We use the word pastor, so since you went there.
Yeah, sorry.
We use the word pastor outwardly for what we behind the scenes, obscene, for what we behind the scenes call a vocational elder, just because it's not a practical fight with the modern era. Like in the modern era, linguistically, everybody knows what a pastor is. And so, we don't want to have some big study every time we say, no, we're all elders.
You sound Mormon when you start calling yourself elder.
Yeah. So behind the scenes, the entire eldership body of the church includes non-vocational, meaning not as their job, elder, and vocational elders, meaning it is your job, elder. You get paid for it. You're a professional elder.
Yep.
And we call the professional elders pastors for ease because that's what our society recognizes them as. So, yeah, but they're all the same office.
Yep.
So hopefully that was helpful. And it's a good question. I'd say in executive summary, don't confuse duties in what may or may not be an overlap of duties with office or station, which are they're connected but different, ultimately different things.
So, yep.
There you go. Hey guys, hope this was a good one. Love all you guys out there. Keep giving us ideas and send your questions in. And
see you around.
Thanks, Vince.
Yeah,
pick up the Vince. I liked it.
Pick up the Vince.
The second official podcast.
The second official. One episode.
There we go.
We're
Episode
canceled.
1.
One and only. We're canceled.
See you, everybody.
See you.